everybody, and welcome to my November reading wrap-up. So in November I read a total of 10 books, which is pretty average for me. I feel like since I started my booktube channel, I started reading to my normal pace again, because I feel like my normal pace is about 5 to 10 books a month, so this is pretty on the higher end of average. And I just wanted to show you all of the books I read. I posted some of these on a blog already, but I feel like it's good to have like a little recap of everything. So the first book that I read was A Holly Jolly Ever After by Julie Murphy and Samantha Simone. Sierra Simone, sorry. So this book is one of the books that I hated the most of this entire year. It's probably going to be in my worst books of 2023. It's just one of the books where like the trope that isn't here, which is the fake pregnancy trope, is just really not for me. So at the beginning, like halfway through this book, like everything was rosy, everything was going so well, and then that trope happened and I kind of hated it from there. But this book is about a guy and a girl who are both gonna be in the first spicy Hallmark movie that has ever been shot. The girl is very Christian and she just got out of being like a female role model and doing like very like the Hallmark movie type movies, and the guy is used to be in a boy band, kind of like NSYNC, and he got a sex tape released, so now he's in very high demand again for the first time in a long time. So they get together and do the first spicy Hallmark movie, and I think it was fun. It was like very much like a great atmosphere because they're in this very little like Christmas town, kind of like filming this movie. But after that, I couldn't stand it. I don't like it, and the guy was very immature, so watch out for that. It's not a bad book. I just didn't like it as much as I thought I would. And then my next book is one of the most popular books so far this year. It's Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I read Fourth Wing earlier this year and absolutely loved it, and I did see a dramatic shift in quality in Iron Flame, and my main concern was that just because I feel like my book is backwards, but I feel like the main characters were just fighting the entire book, and that's not something I necessarily find enjoyable, especially when they're having the same fight over and over again. But yet again, I really do enjoy the writing in this book. Not like the writing is not great, but like the pacing, it's great. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy the pacing. It's all super fast paced. It's all like very romance heavy, very much like a movie in your head. And then when the big twist happened at the end and when a character dies, that's not a spoiler, it did make me cry. So I think that's great. I think like when a book can give me emotions, it is one of the best signs of a good book, even though the writing might not be the best, even though like the plot is not the best I've ever read. For me, it's all about the emotions that a book gave me, and this one was fun, and it was like fast-paced, and I could see everything that was happening in my head, and I love the characters. So even though it's obviously not like the best book ever written, I gave it still at 4 stars. And by the way, I gave this book at 2 stars. I forgot to say it. And then I read this book, and I was so happy I read it. So I'm doing this project when I'm reading a lot of sci-fi books because of the Goodreads Choice Awards. And the book that recently came out in this series actually happens to be in the sci-fi category for the Goodreads Choice Awards. And because I'm not gonna read the final book in a series without reading the first book in a series, I had to read the first book. And this book came out in 2015. 2015. So it is a little outdated, and it does have like, you can feel where it borrows from a lot of other books, especially the Hunger Games. But it was still so amazing. I love the world. It's dystopian, and I actually didn't know like I will call it a twist, but I don't think it's a twist. Like a quarter into the book, like the perspective, the world shifts, and I thought that was just like so interesting. I absolutely loved it. It took me by surprise. The characters are very much like a Mary Sue, chosen one, perfect character. But I honestly don't mind that trope. It's one of the tropes that a lot of people dislike, but I actually enjoy. I do love when my characters are like smarter than everybody else and kind of perfect. And that is what this guy is. So Red Rising, if you don't know, is a book about a guy who is working as like a very low wage worker in Mars. in this society, the society is stratified by colors. So it's kind of like being a red is kind of like the lowest color you can be, and then being a gold is the highest color you can be. And this is kind of like fantasy in a lot of ways, but I feel like they explain it as in like over time people started getting genetic modifications, and because of like breeding eugenics, there was actually like a more like difference in the characteristics of a red versus a gold. Like a gold is like taller, stronger, can process information a lot faster, has wings. So there are actually like difference genetically between reds and golds. And in this society, like reds are the lowest of them all, and he's working in like the mines in Mars, but something happens that makes him kind of have to get out of his comfort zone and become the savior for the Reds. And it's called Red Rising because it's kind of documenting the revolution of the Reds. And I think it's so much fun. I'm definitely gonna keep up in the series, especially because I think this is a completed trilogy, and then 2 more books are coming out that are kind of like companions, but I'm not sure honestly. So yeah, Red Rising, I gave it 5 stars. I actually super enjoyed it. It's just up my alley. I do love a very fast-paced dystopian. And then the next book that I read is another great one. I actually did have a very good reading month, even though I still have some stinkers in there, but it's The Three-Body Problem, and this is one of the most complicated science fiction books I've ever read in my life. And this was actually a reread because I read it when I was like about 16 or 17. I wasn't super young, but I feel like after a lot of time has passed, I understood the concepts a lot better, and since I already knew what was happening, I could focus on the details a lot more. So that's why I do enjoy a reread from time to time. And this one is about a scientist that is contacted by the secret society, and then the police contacts him because everybody that has joined the secret society has committed suicide. So there's a bunch of scientists that have been committing suicide because of joining the secret society and because of the discoveries that the secret society makes. And he decides to infiltrate the secret society, and he starts becoming crazy as well. And then like his whole perspective of the world changes, his whole perspective of science. And honestly, it's one of the most complicated science fiction books I've ever read. I honestly don't know how to describe it because it's like such a like, it encompasses like a long period of time. It's one of those science fiction series that it's not following the same characters. It's more like you see a whole universe form, and that's what's happening. This first book is actually pretty small compared to where the rest of the series expands to. So I think you should definitely pick it up if you're feeling. It's one of those books that you have to pay attention when you're reading it, but I still read it on audio and understood everything that was happening. It is a Chinese translation, I believe, so the names are a little bit more difficult, but if you have like a name chart, you'll do fine. It's absolutely incredible book. It won the Hugo. It's won like every single award of science fiction that's ever been given, so definitely give it a try if you love hard sci-fi. And then the next book that I read is something a little bit lighter. I wanted to pick up like a little small town mystery, so I wanted to read this book because I read in the tagline that it was like a small town mystery taking place during Thanksgiving. So I was like, great, I'll read this like during my Thanksgiving break. It actually takes place in Canada's Thanksgiving, so it takes place in October, but like who cares, like I still got the vibes. So in this small town, an older woman gets mysteriously murdered, and everybody in the small town is kind of like a suspect, and you're going in the perspectives of all her friends and the detective as well. So I think this is a series that follows a detective, but in this book you're following the detective and a group of friends, and it's told on that perspective like omniscient narrator, so you can see everybody's thoughts and feelings. And I feel like every time I read a book in omniscient narration, it feels like a fairy tale. It feels very cozy. I don't know if you read like The Book Thief, like that kind of coziness I feel like I got from these books. And it's actually like a debut novel that actually the author actually became really famous after this debut. It came out a couple years ago, like a lot of years ago. I think it came out like 20 years ago or so, but it's still a great book. I think it holds up, and it was a very good like impulse read for me. Okay, and then the next books, I actually don't have them physically. So the first book that I read in audiobook was Cassandra Clare's Swordcatcher. This is a newest Cassandra Clare book. It is her first adult novel, and I think I've heard of Cassandra Clare before. Obviously she's a very famous author, but I've never read anything by her because she's one of those authors that has like a million books in the same series, and I'm not about to do that to myself. I'm very sorry. If a book if a series has more than 3 books, I tend to avoid it just because I just don't have time. There's a lot of stories out there and I want to get to as many as possible, but one day maybe I'll read her books. But this one kind of intrigued me because it was the first one, so I was actually gonna be able to enter this world fresh and without like any hype around them. So I actually didn't super enjoy this book, and I think it was just because it was a setup book that had a lot of world building and a lot of characters, not necessarily character development. It just had a lot of characters and not any plot whatsoever. So in this world, which is called, I already forgot what the world's called, I'm gonna be completely honest. This guy is the sword catcher for the king, and the sword catcher basically is like a doppelganger to the king, where he kind of like takes his place, and through some magic they end up looking exactly the same. And when he takes his place is when the prince goes into dangerous situations, kind of if like the sword catcher gets killed. It's kind of like, oh, too bad. But actually the sword catcher and the prince actually have become really good friends because they were raised together. But the sword catcher has always been kept like an arm's length to everybody else in this society. And this society is very opulent, and the rich people throw a lot of parties, kind of engage in a lot of like, you know, prostitution, like big feasts, a lot of like sinful nature like gluttony and lust and all of those sins. So he always feels like he's not like that. And then it's also told in another perspective, which is the girl's perspective. And her perspective is basically she's part of this religious group that is the last religious group that has magic. And because of that, they actually are able to heal people with the magic. And a lot of people are scared of this religious group because they don't understand how they still have magic. And they also need them because they need them to heal them. So it's one of those situations where they're ostracized, but at the same time they're needed. So they're kind of like a double-edged sword kind of situation. And she actually encounters the sword catcher and the prince, and there's some tension going on. And it's a good book, but I feel like a lot of that I explained to you right now is what most of the book is about. And that should have just been the synopsis, and then something else happens. And that is what I felt like this book was missing, this something else. And I know that it's gonna come in like the next book of the series, and I think that if the next book of the series comes out anytime soon and I still feel like picking it up, I will. But I just feel like you can't just have a bunch of setup and no real plot. And that is kind of what that book was, so I gave it 3 stars. And then the next book that I read was The Nestling. This book is about a woman who is suffering from postpartum depression, and actually when she was having her baby, she suffered a spinal injury, so she's not able to walk anymore, and she's kind of like depressed and not able to walk and dealing with a newborn, so a lot of high stress situations. When she wins the like renters lottery in New York, so she gets to move to this very fancy prestigious building for the first time, and the building is kind of like sketchy in the way that like none of the tenants talk to each other. Everybody is like being very like keeping them very at an arm's length, and she starts hearing weird noises at night, and her baby starts acting weird. So this is a combination of like Rosemary's Baby and like kind of like a vampire story. So I think it's a good book to read during Halloween. I feel like the depictions of postpartum depression are pretty good. I just don't super love this type of horror. I kind of like more of a mystery horror. I feel like if you know that there's gonna be a monster, you're kind of just waiting for the whole book for the monster to appear, and then you're like, oh yeah, it's right there. So I felt like it didn't have that tension that a lot of horrors have that I really love. That mystery, that tension, but it was still very beautiful reading. The characters were strong. It was a good book, but I still gave it a 3 star, just like not my favorite of this month. I read another book for the sci-fi good read category. This one was I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself. This book is actually super interesting because it's something I would have never picked on my own because it sounded depressing and annoying, but I actually ended up super enjoying it. So in this world, everybody that commits a crime gets an extra shadow. Like, I have one shadow. If I commit a crime, I get 2 shadows. If I commit another crime, I get 3 shadows. And it keeps building and building up. And because of this new policy, the government has become like very much like involved in anybody's lives. If you get an extra shadow, you get like very much ostracized from society. You get like worse health insurance, worse jobs. You can't live in certain areas. So you basically like, it's like a very bad deterrent to doing something bad. And in this society, a woman gets an extra shadow and you're following her and her life as she's trying to like kind of like deal with the new shadow and how it affects her day-to-day life. And simultaneously, she becomes a single mother because her partner passes away when she was giving birth, and the baby gets an extra shadow just because she technically killed her mother, but it was not her fault. Like, the mom died giving birth, but because the baby technically killed the mother because of some weird technicality they never really explained in the book, the baby gets an extra shadow. So she also has to deal with explaining to a toddler why everybody in society is treating her different. And I think this is just a very elaborate metaphor to like having to teach kids about being in a society that like treats them differently because of race, ethnicity, sexuality. And it's a really well done metaphor. I feel like I really enjoyed myself. It's a plotless book. It's more like a slice of life, just trying to like figure out how to approach these topics with a young child, how to like make sure that the young child still loves themselves but also doesn't like put themselves in dangerous situations by trying to rebel too much against the society, even though you kind of want the child to rebel because the society is being unfair, but you don't want the child to be in danger. So I think it's very much like interesting way of putting like these dilemmas that parents actually do have. And I think it was a beautiful put metaphor. I gave it 4 stars. Definitely my most recommended read for this month because I feel like everybody could use this book to read, but it's not the most enjoyable book I read this month. And then the last book that I read was another sci-fi. This was a big sci-fi month for me. And that one is The Marriage Act by John Mars. So I read other book by John Mars. I think he also have that book where the people were getting genetically matched to their perfect partner. And this is kind of like a continuation to that book where now the government is also in your house, in your marriage, because in this society, the English government has determined that the best way to keep a society in check is by everybody to have a partner, to have a household with a parent, 2 parents that are happily married, and the people that are happily married get bigger boosts, incentives to keep being happily married. They get better tax, they get better housing, they get better basically everything. But the downside is that you also have to have a device on your house that basically keeps track of your marriage. It keeps track of your mood, it keeps track of whether you guys are arguing, if you guys are doing okay. And if you guys are not doing okay, you have to go to this like retraining program for your marriage where you have to like kind of like discuss what's going on in your marriage and whether or not you can resolve your problems. And it kind of becomes it's a study of how much involvement is too much involvement when it comes to the government in your daily life. So it's very interesting. I feel like it's a great continuation to the match in this kind of like universe that is very much like our own. It's very light sci-fi, I feel like, because all these things actually could happen and you can see a world where this does happen. So it's very like, ooh, in that way, because you're like, oh, this really could happen. And I feel like a lot of people wouldn't see necessarily the repercussions of this till it's like too late. So I thought it was super interesting. It does build itself up like a thriller. And then the thrilling elements kind of are not there. But I feel like if you go at this like a sci-fi and not as a thriller, you're gonna enjoy your reading experience a lot more. Because if you're thinking this is a thriller, you're probably not gonna have as much fun, because it's basically like a thriller in the last 20 pages. And the rest of them is just you going along with these couples that are trying to fix their marriages. And again, if you don't want to hear about couples having bad marriages for 300 pages, don't read this book because you won't enjoy it, because it's a bunch of like couples having bad marriages. So yeah, those are all. Oh, and the last book that I read that I'm not gonna rank, I read Matthew Perry's Autobiography, because, you know, Matthew Perry passed away in November. I think it was early November that he passed away, and I just kind of wanted to know more about his life, more about what happened to him after Friends, because I really didn't keep up to it. And it was like beautifully written. It was written by himself, so it just like felt very much like he put his voice on paper. As far as a timeline, it's not very much like how a lot of biographies are written, where you follow a story from beginning to end. It's more about his struggles in life, so you're kind of just like hearing of how he had to go through each struggle in his life to become better. And honestly, it's a really good book. I recommend it if you want to know more about him and his life. And yeah, I'm not gonna rate it. It feels weird to read a biography. So yeah, those are all the books I read in November. I had a lot of fun. In December, my reading plans are basically to do the Books in Lala Book Club, and then to keep reading the Goodreads Choice Awards science fiction books. So that's going to be mostly on my reading, because I have to read a lot of those. And then I'm going to sprinkle some Christmas books here and there. I am already reading Wreck the Halls and The Greenhouse, which are winter books that I wanted to get to this year. And yeah, those are all my reads for this month and some of the reads for next month. I'll talk to you later. Bye!